And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The red wave, kind of a trickle. Not even really that, so to speak. Was expecting, we talked about this yesterday, was expecting, potentially the wave that the mainstream corporate-controlled for-profit media was throwing at us. Not as much as we thought it was going to be. Now, reality is young people, women came out in big numbers. It's the reason that John Fetterman won. Exit polling showed Fetterman got 70% of the Gen Z vote. And I think it was like 55% of the millennial vote. And you wonder why the GOP is trying to stop them from voting. Now there's the weird thing. We still not 100% sure that Republicans are going to take the House. It looks like it's going to happen. And that's probably, honestly, given the state of where we are, the second best opportunity. Democrats holding on to the House and holding on to the Senate so that we could actually get some stuff done. That the best, in my view, the best outcome. But the second best one is, hold on to the Senate, give the Republicans the House a slim majority, and let them be as crazy as they want to be. It's just one of those things where you go, they're going to be as crazy as, because almost certainly they're going to overreach. Now, got to hold on to the Senate because you want to allow Biden to continue to get his people through the nomination process, the judges on the bench, and all of that stuff. But there's a part of me, and we talked about this yesterday on the program. There's part of me that goes, maybe you need to let the what they want to have happen. Impeachment hearings weekly, all of the kind of absurd, ridiculous, we're going to investigate everything. Hunter Biden's underwear, I guess we're going to find out what size he wears. This is where they want to go. This is how they govern. Understand? Again, no plan, no policies. We're going to see. Now, like I said, there's a chance Democrats could still hold the Senate. That's still up in the air. There are 3 Senate seats still left in play. There are some 50 House seats that they're saying still left in play. Lauren Boebert's seat, she's down by like 70 votes, which tells me every vote matters. But I got into this conversation, this back and forth today of, what was yesterday? What was Tuesday's vote? Was it the pro-democracy, anti-MAGA majority turning out and sending that resounding message that Republican extremism is something we're not going to tolerate? Like in Pennsylvania with Doug Mastriano being just thumped? Or was it, just the GOP candidates were really bad, like Doug Mastriano, really bad? Or was it really November? Was it the women who came out in overwhelming numbers and decided that this is it? I think it's all of the above and then some. This is where the organizing of where we go from here. This is where the organizing of what's next has to happen. And I keep coming back to, we need to get into rural communities. We need to talk about the wins. We need to talk about the things that Biden has done, the policies that they're moving, the good stuff. And also listen, there are a lot of communities that we went through on the Working Class Heroes Tour that, they were the used to be's. We need to make them the future. So that's where I'm kind of at. Now, would Republicans have had a better shot of winning bigger margins and all of that in the House and maybe even the Senate seats if they had better candidates or even just generic candidates? Probably. Because look, the exit polls in a midterm election with a very unpopular president, with inflation as high as it is and some of the problems that gas prices as high as it is, you had independents who swung towards Democrats. 49% of independents polled went over to the Democrats. In fact, what's interesting is even the people who disapprove of Biden, somewhat or more. 49% of the people who disapprove of Biden voted for him, compared to 45% who voted against him. That's pretty impressive. Now, what's been interesting for me to watch today is the temper tantrum on the right. Donald Trump leading the way, blaming his wife for Dr. Oz, because that's the manly thing to do. It's my wife's fault. She made me do it. She made me. And look, he backed a lot of bad candidates, a lot of crazy candidates. But that didn't stop him today from going after Ron DeSantis, who won a resounding victory. If there was a red wave, it was Florida. But you do have him going after DeSantis, saying, the election in Florida is over and everything went quite well. Shouldn't it be said that in 2020 I got 1.1 million more votes in Florida than Ron D got this year? Just asking. Don, it was a presidential year. You can't compare the two, but you can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to tear down DeSantis. They're trying to tear into him because Trump sees that's his competition. So it's going to be interesting to watch them eat each other. Now, the funny thing is Pat Toomey, who John Fetterman took his position, or is going to be taking his position, said, Trump's the one to blame for all of this. He's laying all of the losses, all of the problems, everything in this election cycle at the doorstep of Donald Trump. And saying, look, the party needs to look elsewhere. The party needs to move in a new direction. The party needs to dump the Trump. Found that interesting. Now, here's the weird thing is there's going to be a MAGA caucus. There's going to be a crazy, red hat wearing MAGA caucus because at least 80 people who questioned the 2020 election, they've won seats in the House. That is going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But look, Tuesday's election, massive victories for Democrats. When what was supposed to be a 40-seat loss, they're only going to lose a handful. Republicans, you kind of screwed yourself up. And fortunately for workers, for democracy, for the future of this country, that's where we are. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Greg Palast is going to be here to share some thoughts on his movie Vigilante and what's going on down in Georgia. A runoff election going to happen, and how much did SB 202 play into that? We're going to find out with Greg after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. Generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the Senate is weighing in the balance, and I think Georgia's going to be it. Do we end up with a Senator Herschel Walker who literally came out and said, hey, I struggle from mental illness, and the woman I love, my wife, worries I'm going to murder her. That guy could be in the Senate. I mean, that's just mind-blowing to me. But again, I got a question. How much of what Republicans have done legislatively has caused this? And here to share some thoughts on what's going on in Georgia, maybe a little on the runoff. I've asked our good friend Greg Palast to come share some thoughts with us. Greg is an author of numerous books, my favorite being The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Also, the latest movie, Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman, which you can watch over the next 2 days at vigilantemovie.com. Greg, thanks for taking time for us.
Greetings from lovely Georgia, where I'm stuck again. 9 years in a row. I keep coming back to Georgia because it is ground zero of it's the vote, as my colleague Zach Roberts says, it's the test kitchen for vote suppression trickery.
Let's talk about that.
That's
really quick. How much of this race being as close as it is has to do with the fact that people have been denied the ability to vote? How much of that's playing into it?
About 100%. I just left the New Georgia Project, which is the one of the key voting rights groups here, and I asked the same question you did. I was interviewing them on camera, and I said, "Is there any? So did the Jim Crow suppression tactics play anything in denying Reverend Senator Warnock a clean victory? He's now understand. Warnock is now in a runoff. The Senator Warnock, the Democrat, in a runoff with Herschel Walker." And because neither of them got 50% of the vote plus one, Warnock is probably going to come a couple thousand votes short. And they said 100% it's Jim Crow trickery. And I can give you just a few quick examples. You know what? And by the way, again, you can see, I just want to tell people at the front end, get a pencil or type it into your machine or your phone, whatever. Tonight and tomorrow night, you can see the film Vigilante, Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman, care of Jamie Foxx, who has paid for us to have it free tonight and tomorrow, so you know what's going on in Georgia at vigilantemovie.com. Now, did you know that last year, 2020, in the presidential election, there were 1.2 million mail-in ballots, overwhelmingly cast by Democrats, overwhelmingly cast by black folk, progressives, urban areas. 1.2 million mail-in ballots.
Right.
This year, this election, 0.2 million mail-in ballots. And a drop, vanishing 1 million mail-in ballots. Again, that's where the Democrats vote, is early mail-in. A million down.
How is
Why?
that? Is it just that Democrats said, no, we're going to go to the polls this year. We're going to take... No?
You'd have to be out of your mind to go to the polls. I'll tell you why, because they've cut the number of polling stations so you can wait 5 hours in line. And under SB 202 signed last year by Governor Kemp, if I hand you a bottle of water or pizza, you're waiting in line 5 hours. This is no joke. That's a felony crime in Georgia. Now, so no one wants you'd have to be crazy, but you have no choice. You have to vote in person because they've made mail-in voting, knowing that it's Democratic, almost impossible. So they lost 1 million mail-in votes, 83% drop. How do they do that? Two things. Number one, they start this new gimmick where it's very difficult to ask for the ballot. It's very difficult to fill it out because you have to include ID, which is ridiculous because they won't send you an absentee ballot unless they verify who you are anyway. So you still got to send back that ID, even though you had to have an ID to get the ballot. Second, people in Atlanta use drop boxes. There were 107 drop boxes in the Atlanta area. It's all Democrats. And now there are 25 by state law. So they dropped for all of Atlanta area. And when I say Atlanta area, I don't mean just the city, the whole surrounds. Right. In 4 key urban counties, 25 boxes. And so it's almost impossible to use it. But guess what? That's not good enough to just cut them by 75%. They had to say, you can't use the drop box. They used to be outside 24 hours like a mailbox. Now they're inside the polling stations. You cannot use a ballot drop box unless you go during voting hours, early voting hours, and drop it off inside the polling station. Well, it's like waiting in line. And also, again, they made it nearly impossible to use those drop boxes because it was a Democratic.
Yeah, it sounds like somebody doesn't want people to vote.
You think. And dig this. Now, there's going to be a runoff, and we're going to decide. And so Georgia, again, they changed the date of the runoff. In the 2020 election, they had the runoff between Warnock and when Ossoff ran. Remember, he had 2 Senate seats that went into runoff in Georgia. They had 60 days. They cut that to 30. And I asked them why. I asked the voting groups why. And they said, very simple. Cutting the voting days. Guess when the deadline for registering for the primary, for the runoff is? The day before yesterday.
Yeah, of course.
So that anyone who says, oh my God, this runoff is going to be incredibly important, I want to register to vote, or you know, young people, there's literally tens of thousands of young people who suddenly qualify, turn 18 in this month in Georgia. And remember, young people vote Democratic. You can't register to vote. If you're going to turn 18, tough luck, buddy. You won't be allowed to vote in Georgia because you have to register the day before the general election instead of the month after. There's no time. And the groups are saying, because again, Democrats vote by mail. They say, don't ask for a mail-in ballot. No one's set up to do it. The ballots aren't printed. Remember, they won't even know officially till tomorrow if there's a runoff. There's no early voting hours even set. They don't even know what days you're allowed to do early voting, if they're going to have early voting at all. The rules, because they changed the law, and the law, when they changed the law, they didn't change the early voting hours. So the early voting hours at the moment are after the election. so you want to vote early, it'll be after the election, your vote won't count. So this is, welcome to Georgia. Welcome to Jim Crow.
It's laughable, but you know, this is deadly
laughable,
serious. I mean, the reality is the future of this country hangs in the balance, because this one race is going to decide, I believe, who has control of the Senate.
Exactly. As it did last time, we're going to see this again, and they're going to do everything to keep Reverend Warnock from getting reelected. So again, now, and the other thing, so you lost 1 million mail-in ballots. They've shut off the drop boxes. Imagine if the post office said, oh, you can still use a mailbox, but you can only the mailboxes inside the post office during postal hours. By the way, all drop boxes were sealed off last week. You couldn't use it on election day. You couldn't use it. They stopped souls to the polls voting on Sunday. There was no early voting permitted on this past weekend before the election, the normal souls to the polls day. Who is souls to the polls day? The souls are black souls going to the polls. So they stopped that too. They will do anything to stop the votes. The other thing that they were doing is thousands of ballots were never received. Absentee ballots were received. The New York Times said, oh, it was 1,000 ballots from one county. No, because the New York Times sits there in their little tower in Atlanta, and they only see the one county in Atlanta. No, this is, we have 159.
It's pervasive. This is all of them, isn't it?
This is all over, thousands and thousands of voters. And again, who are those voters who don't get their ballots? Young people, et cetera. We also have this, and the whole point of vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman, the key story is that these individual vigilantes, these are not government officials, they are Republican Party officials. I'm not being partisan, Rick. Every single vote challenger, every single one, almost 100 of them, have challenged 149,000 voters. Every single challenger is a Republican official, every one. The Democrats don't do this. I asked the Democrats why, the obvious question, well, why don't you challenge a couple 100,000 of their voters? They said, we can't do that. It's just not we are not going to grace this ugly Jim Crow tactic by mirroring it. So if you think look, if this was a fair fight, and remember, that's why Stacey Abrams called her organization Fair Fight.
Right.
If this was a fair fight, there would be no runoff. I mean, Herschel Walker wouldn't have even been in the running. He's hit his head too many times to actually run a campaign. And besides, he had to move here from Texas, so he was busy unpacking during the campaign. He's not a Georgia.
Yeah, but isn't that, to me, that's the bigger part of all this. I mean, the voter suppression thing, yeah, that's enormous. The voter theft that is going on, that's enormous. But even the fact that anyone would vote for this person as even remotely qualified, that to me just sends an even bigger red flag up. Yes, it's extraordinarily important to talk about vote theft and vote suppression and all the things that the Republicans have done. Yes, I'm there, but I'm still stuck in this place that this guy is wholly unqualified to be anywhere. He shouldn't even be allowed to visit the Senate, let alone be a senator.
He's perfectly qualified because, as he says, he has tremendous mental problems. He relies on other people to tell him what to do, and that's what they wanted. They want some guy who is the glove puppet of the powers of Georgia. Because I want to remind you, as we say in the film Vigilante, vote suppression is class war by other means. See, most vote suppression, as you know, has been aimed at black people. but also young people. But it's really, when they say black, they mean people without the power and authority economically. And the ruling class, remember one thing you'll find out in the film, and it's not much of a spoiler alert because there's so much good stuff in there. But we found out that Brian Kemp, the current governor, who just beat Stacey Abrams, that's another question. But Brian Kemp, his family was the first to bring enslaved Africans to Georgia. This is the oldest, richest family of Georgia. They're not going to give up their power. They're not going to give up their authority. The Southern Company, Georgia Power, what's the biggest company in Georgia? Koch Industries.
Right.
This is where the Georgia Pacific, where they make all your toilet paper, that's Koch Industries. Do you think that they're going to let Reverend Warnock stay in the U.S. Senate? Now, the good news is that they can't shaft you out of your vote, every single vote.
Yeah, they can't take them all.
So they can't take them all. They can only shave it. So all these techniques, like stopping people from registering for the runoff, not sending in their ballots. We have a problem in Georgia called exact match. So, for example, the head of the New Georgia Project was named, the last head was Nse Ufot from Africa, and citizen here for many years, attorney. But she has an accent over her name, N-S-E. You can imagine how many state records don't match her name exactly or don't have the accent correct. And the result is that her vote, if she shows her driver's license, it doesn't match her registration, she can't vote. I kid you not. And you mail in your ballot and you forget that you registered using your middle initial, but you signed it without your middle initial. For this picayune thing, in like,
no, it's a way to it's a way to steal people's votes. No, I'm right
45 states, they say, well, it's obviously you. Rick Smith, is Rick Smith. Just because one time he said Rick G. Smith and one time he said just Rick Smith, it's you. But there, you've got this gotcha game. And as you're seeing in Pennsylvania, when they said, oh, you didn't date your ballot. By the way, do you know why you have to date your ballot in Pennsylvania? So they make sure that it was actually mailed on time. Well, do you realize there are thousands of ballots in Pennsylvania where the voting officials already had, before Election Day, your ballot?
Yep.
So they know that it was mailed on time. But if you didn't put in the date or the post office didn't stamp it with the date, hey, you're SOL. And this is the games that are being played. They don't trust the voters, certainly not in Georgia. Because when they let the voters vote in Georgia, they get shocked because Georgia actually has a long history as a progressive state. And people don't realize that. And the only way that they could have kept power is by their plantation voting system.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Again, we're going to keep up on this, and I want you to come back and keep us up to date on what's going on as you're on the ground. But today and tomorrow, the movie, vigilantemovie.com. Go see it. Like me, I think you're going to be shocked, and it is free. Get the popcorn because it is a popcorn movie. Greg, as always, great stuff, brother. Appreciate it.
You're the best. Greg Palast reporting for Rick Smith from Georgia.
Thanks so much. GregPalast.com, the website. Also, make sure you check out that one. But important, vigilantemovie.com. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Highly suggest it. And as I said, grab the popcorn because it's still a movie, and it's a good one. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1996. That was the day the United Steelworkers and Bridgestone Firestone finally reached a tentative settlement after a bitter 28-month dispute. After years of restructuring and decline, the company demanded massive concessions from the workforce. By July 1994, 4,000 members of the United Rubber Workers walked off the job at 5 plants across the country. They were on strike against wage and benefit cuts. The wrongful loss of holidays and union protections. They also rejected the company's attempt to institute a grueling 12-hour, 7-day work week and a 2-tier wage scale. The company permanently replaced more than half of the workforce 6 months into the strike. When the NLRB was slow to answer numerous unfair labor practice complaints, the United Rubber Workers called off the strike the following May. The company refused to reinstate hundreds of strikers, including 2 local presidents fired for union activity. Those who did return came back to plants filled with scabs. Though the strike may have ended, a campaign for justice continued when the United Rubber Workers merged with the United Steelworkers. Historian Robert Weir notes that in launching its international campaign, the United Steelworkers publicized the company's pollution problems, its safety and health violations, and intolerable working conditions. It also forged an important link with a militant Japanese union Zenroiko, raising fears that the strike could spread to Bridgeport's home operations. Protests, demonstrations, and boycotts continued throughout 1996 until the NLRB finally answered unfair labor practices brought against the company. The final settlement included the rehiring of all strikers, a wage increase, and all workers' original demands except one. Production speed-up would continue.
Every election day, we're told, go vote. Your vote is sacred, they tell us. It's your constitutional right. Well, yes to voting, but most people, including most politicians, would be astonished to learn that America's Constitution contains no declaration that we the people have a right to vote. In the founding document of our democratic republic, voting is mentioned 37 times, but none of them embrace access to the ballot as a fundamental right. This is no oversight, for most of the founders of the 1780s were unabashed plutocrats who wanted suffrage restricted to white male property owners, fencing out the Democratic rabble. James Madison himself, author of the Bill of Rights, insisted that only the wealthy be allowed to vote, calling them, quote, the safest repositories of Republican liberty. He warned that poorer classes could be swayed by populist anger at the propertied elites. Among the prominent founders, only Benjamin Franklin had the temerity to dissent from Madison's institutionalization of plutocratic rule, pointing out that the vast majority of those who had fought, bled, and died to establish the new nation were landless commoners. He also rudely noted that the wealthy were at least as corruptible as the poorest of the poor, so disenfranchising the masses would do nothing to improve a government's virtue. Slowly, painfully, generations of grassroots commoners have inched open the American ballot box to more of us, extending the legal possibilities of democratic participation. But as we see in this year's blatant, violent mob efforts by the right-wing minority to shut out millions of legitimate voters, the few can still overrule the many in America. This is Jim Hightower saying, meanwhile, bills calling for a constitutional amendment to affirm every citizen's fundamental right to cast a ballot have never been given a hearing, much less a vote.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, as we've been talking about, it wasn't the red wave that we were promised. It was barely a trickle, but some good, really good stuff came out of it. For instance, my state of Pennsylvania, big win. The Democrats are going to hold the House in Pennsylvania for the first time in a couple of decades. This is a big thing. Michigan, Minnesota, just, but no bigger in my view than what happened in Illinois, as the voters in Illinois voted overwhelmingly. At this point, it's like a 60-40 split that they voted for the Workers' Right Amendment to make sure that the union rights are constitutional rights. And, this is something that I've been saying for a long time needs to happen. Labor needs to be just pushing on this stuff. That's why I've asked Don Villar to come talk with us. Don is the Secretary-Treasurer of the Chicago Federation of Labor, one of the driving forces behind this Workers' Right Amendment. You can check out their website, chicagolabor.org. Don, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me call in for tonight. Thanks for talking about such an important topic. I mean, what a what a big victory for labor.
Oh, absolutely.
Here.
And one that I'm hoping now is going to be the springboard that we see go through states across the country, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, California. Start pushing these out and get this momentum in the direction of saying, you know what, we believe in workers' rights, and get voters to vote on that issue.
Right. I mean, we all work. Every worker deserves rights. And then, putting it in the Constitution, adding it to the Bill of Rights, I mean, workers' rights, civil rights, workers' rights, human rights, it's all the same. And we did something in Illinois that, that hasn't been done in the country, anywhere in the country. I mean, just codify, these rights. I mean, this is part of our basic rights, workers' rights.
Yeah. Now, what I thought was interesting, and while we were in Chicago on our Working Class Heroes radio tour, I found it interesting. The attacks against this were it's going to cost the state all kinds of money. It's going to do all these horrible things. The sun's going to fade. The moon's going to explode. Babies won't be born. Puppies will run in fear. And all it is saying that what you have currently is what will remain for future generations. So I found the fear and smear and the scare tactics kind of humorous, and I'm glad that they didn't work.
Exactly. Fear and confusion, fear and lies and misinformation. That's their tactic, right? I mean, if you can't beat them head to head, lie, and just scare the bejesus out of people to follow your lead. And I mean, raising property taxes or impacting this, that, or the other. It was just, that message just didn't ring through. It's amazing. I mean, there are a couple articles, some newspapers picked apart like the arguments from the other side, and they said, nah, that's not true. It is not true. And just the misinformation, the fact checking, and I mean, but that's their playbook, right? Yeah. You scare people, to vote against their interest. Unfortunately, here in Illinois, the good people who understand, who care about workers' rights, they won out.
Now, again, I come back to this, and for me, this is hopefully going to be that springboard, as I said, because I think people in this moment, especially coming out of the pandemic, we were told we're essential, we're frontline heroes, and not being treated that way. The tool, the avenue, the instrument to ensure that you're essential, ensure you're treated with dignity and fairness, and you make better wages, hours, and conditions. That tool, and I think this is that moment, Don, that we got to be out there talking about just how important collective bargaining rights are, just how important the work that you and others in the labor movement do.
Yeah, no, I mean, the latest Pew report said, I mean, we have 70% of the public have a positive view of unions. 70%, it's like the highest in more than half a century. And people understand the need for that voice, for labor unions. And man, I think this demonstrates that the country needs unions. American workers need the labor movement, and they need the labor movement to be active, to be fighting for them, to pretty much everything that we always fight for: wages, hours, working conditions, and also everything else, lifting up communities, protecting families. It goes beyond that, right? I mean, that's what work is so vital for our families and for our communities, and that's what the labor movement's all about here.
Yeah,
and,
you're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Don Villari, Secretary-Treasurer of the Chicago Federation of Labor. Make sure you check out their website, chicagolabor.org. We'll get links out on social media where you can look that up. Also, look at the huge victory on the Workers' Rights Amendment. Now, I do got to ask you, because as we were going around on our Working Class Heroes tour, we were going to a lot of rural communities, a lot of places that you would consider as used to be. They used to be the manufacturer of rubber, used to be the glass capital, used to be this or that. Voters are angry, and I think the one thing that Democrats have got to get their heads around is that rural voters are angry, urban voters are angry, and for me, the way we fix some of this stuff is we bring back manufacturing, we make those jobs that we have good union jobs, because everybody I talk to all across our tour, they're pining for those jobs back. They want those union jobs, and I don't think they necessarily want those dirty factory jobs. Nobody wants to go back into the steel mills. They want those union jobs. They want those wages, those benefits, that job security.
Yeah, no, we're back to where we were about a century ago. As the labor movement before the National Labor Relations Act, right? Workers today are not much different than they were a century ago. We're all just trying to live and survive, and the struggles are the same. And sure, it was manufacturing and industry back then, but today it's a different kind of work, right? Our service sector, we're not necessarily working with our hands, but we're working more and more with our minds, right? And minds and hearts. So,
yeah, let me ask you this, because I had someone while I was on the tour, and now you being in Chicago, the home of the fight for the 8-hour workday. This person told me that we don't need the 8-hour day anymore. We don't need overtime pay or any of that stuff anymore, because we don't do that kind of hard physical manual labor like they used to, that the 8-hour day protected people from. We don't need that, because all we do now is sit on the couch and use our computers. Do you have any thoughts on whether that's flawed ideology or not?
Oh, that's definitely flawed ideology. I mean, at the end of the day, working 8 hours, I mean, you're going to be dog tired whether you're using your brains or using your muscle. And I had a meeting earlier tonight, and I was talking to some folks in the newsroom. They're not lifting 100-pound bags or working in the boiler room, but they're just as dog tired, producing and writing stories for air. And that mental stress. I guess that's what we all work is a stressful thing, whether it's physical labor or mental labor.
Yeah, and it's called work, Don. It's not called fun.
No.
It's called work for a reason. These are still hours of my life that I'm giving to somebody to earn enough money so I can support my family. I'm not doing this because I woke up today and go, gee, I want to do whatever the task is because it's fun. I hope it's fun for people when they go to work. I hope they enjoy what they do. But I got to think that most people, they got their choice. They're doing something else.
Absolutely. I love folks who say, hey, I'm doing the work that I love. But also, at the end of the day, it's still stressful work. I mean, it's still a lot of work, and they get tired. They're dealing with all the other abuses that any job requires, right? And it's work. I'm glad you love it, maybe, and hope that makes the day go by a little easier.
Yep.
But it's still work. It's labor.
Yeah. No, I love what I do here, but I could easily do something else.
Right.
But here's the thing, and this is where we're in a moment, and I want to get your thoughts on Tuesday's election results, because I know in Illinois you guys did pretty well. Illinois is a pretty sane state. Ohio, my former state of Ohio, I don't know what happened. I was really hopeful that Tim Ryan, who I think ran the right campaign, was right on the issues, and where I think Democrats need to find their messaging. I'm curious your thoughts nationally. What'd you think of the day?
Oh, you know what? Everybody was girding themselves for that big red wave tsunami, and it turned out to be just a trickle, right? And been watching intently, with the Senate. I mean, there was that big pickup in Pennsylvania, and hopefully Nevada and Arizona fall our way. It looks like Arizona is, Kelly's doing well in Arizona, and then hopefully, Democrat in Nevada, when those votes start coming in, she'll pull it out, and then we've got a runoff in Georgia, right? So there's a chance here that it's not going to be too crazy. So the last question I've got for you, because you as a labor leader, as someone who's pushing policy, where do we go the next 2 years? And nothing's going to get done legislatively on the national level. We're not going to get any huge legislation pushed through. What's the messaging? What are you guys going to be pushing for and working for over these next 2 years, do you think? I mean, again, just continuing the fight for workers' rights, right, around the country. I think one of the big things right now, I mean, you see with, the Fed trying to ramp up interest rates to reduce or to raise the unemployment rate. Like, people want to work, these policies, these economic policies that are making it, that's really impacting workers more than, the investment class, right? I mean, think about that whole policy. The Fed's raising interest rates so they could increase unemployment.
No, they're saying that. I mean, that's they're outwardly saying that they want to push down wages and they want to bring down inflation off the backs of working people.
Yeah, but I think inflation is going to be the big thing. But let's face it, a lot of this inflation is corporate driven. I mean, it's just profit driven. Oil and gas companies trying to, they're just taking, putting this over the coals, and I mean, all the the commodities. It doesn't make sense.
Consolidation, monopolization, and corporate greed. That's for me, that's the main driver. And I think, there's an economist recently who actually put a number on how much of the inflation is responsible, how much is responsible for corporate greed. And he said 53%. So over half of the inflation is based on CEOs going, hey, this is a great opportunity to gouge our customers and screw over our workers and line our pockets. So is it surprising that they do it when they have the opportunity? Of course not.
Of course not. I mean, that's what they're doing. And to some extent, I was thinking about this the other day. Remember during COVID time, right? When the global shutdown, the oil companies, they were spending more money to hold on to the oil than to pull the oil out of the ground, right? Remember that? There was a negative price point on oil, on a barrel of oil. So to some extent, I mean, they're trying to rip us off again after.
Yeah, and remember, I don't know about you, but I took economics course, and when there's this oversupply of something, the price goes down. It shouldn't be going up. So if they had all this stuff that they were holding on to when it went into the market, the price should have been down. But no, not in our rigged economy.
No, you hit the nail right on the head. The rigged economy. I think folks need to. Here in Illinois, I mean, fortunately in the city of Chicago, I mean, we got public transit. I mean, I took the train the other day. So in one last push before the Workers' Rights Amendment, I was doing some door knocking yesterday afternoon, just making sure everybody went out to the polls. So I went up to a neighborhood on the city's northwest side and I hopped on the train, and I was good. Here in town, folks are complaining about the price of gas and traffic. It's like I was pleasantly surprised to see that the trains were full. So maybe folks are finally realizing, man, one way to deal with the high cost of gas, take public transit.
There you go. Help out our union brothers and sisters who work in the transit industry. Absolutely.
Our ATU sisters and brothers.
There you go. Don, as always, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. Keep up the great work there in Chicago, and I look forward to having you come back and talk to us again.
You got it, Rick. You take care.
Good stuff, Don Villar. He is the Secretary-Treasurer of the Chicago Federation of Labor. Make sure you check out their website, chicagolabor.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. But again, huge, huge victory. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1952. That was the day that the labor movement lost Philip Murray. Philip was born in Scotland in 1886 to an Irish Catholic family. His father was a coal miner and a union leader. Philip followed his father into the mines at just the age of 10 years old. The father and son made the trip to the Pennsylvania coal fields together when Philip was just 16. They saved enough money and then sent for the rest of their family. One day, Philip got into an altercation with one of his bosses. Not only was he fired, his entire family was kicked out of their company home. From that point on, Philip was dedicated to the union cause as the only hope for working people. He quickly rose through the ranks of the United Mine Workers, becoming vice president by the time he was 33. He worked closely with United Mine Workers president John L. Lewis. During the 1930s, there became a nationwide drive to organize industrial workers. Philip was appointed to lead the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, a key sector for the industrial effort. The Steelworker Campaign met with historic success. they reached a collective bargaining agreement with U.S. Steel, the giant of the industry. Philip went on to become the first president of the United Steelworkers of America, as well as president of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Under his leadership, industrial labor became a powerful force. But that force was checked by the passage of the Anti-Union Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. The anti-communist hysteria of the Red Scare also took its toll on the CIO, forcing Philip to expel some of the most radical unions from the organization. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Again, that Workers' Rights Amendment is something, again, I'm hoping states across the country are going to grab onto and push out and get people organized around. I think it's a good thing. And again, chicagolabor.org, the website, if you want to take a look at that. Let's go to the phones. Got Alice on line one. Alice, how are we doing today?
We're doing better since we found out that Fetterman won.
Yes. Oh, and Shapiro. I mean, like I said, Shapiro, for me, that was the big one. And then Fetterman. I'm thrilled to see that. And look, you know, the Democrats in Pennsylvania have taken the House. That is enormous.
I know. And I wasn't too worried about Shapiro because I hadn't seen a whole lot of Mastriano signs in our little red county. But I had seen some Oz ones, so I was going, oh, this is not a good thing.
Yeah.
But Florida, I was just like, really? They're insane. And my husband said tonight when we were watching the news and then finding out, of course, at the hurricane, they have another one. And my husband said, you know what? Maybe they ought to make Trump pay for damages from the hurricane. And then he started laughing. He goes, but that's assuming that he has any money. And I was just like, yeah, really.
There's that. But look, I've got some listeners who've reached out and said, you know, maybe it's time to cut off these welfare states, these red states who take more from the federal government and take money from blue states to be able to do the horrible things they do. Maybe it's time to start cutting off the welfare stream to those states.
Oh, I would go for that because you're sitting there going, he spent how many millions to illegally indulge himself in human trafficking, because that's what he did.
Yeah.
And now he's going to want money to rebuild because we have another hurricane going through. Enough of that already.
There you go. Appreciate it, Alice. Thanks so much.
Have a good one.
Good stuff. Yeah, I mean, you know, I've had a bunch of people lately say, you know, we should be cutting these people, these red states off, you know, from federal funding because, you know, evidently they've got the right policies. They shouldn't need welfare from the federal government. Kind of interesting thought. Let's go to I got Eric on line 3 listening on KTNF in Minnesota. Eric, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, hey, thank you for taking my call. No, it's I'm overall happy. In fact, it's funny the tip mentioned before. Yeah, if only, but I'll tie that into what I was going to say here in a little bit. But yeah, DFL state. I mean, that's actually a pretty big deal. I'm pretty happy about that. They're going to get rid of the gridlock that the Republicans have been putting up in the in the state legislature for a while. Think we're going to get some stuff done for actual people. You know, not the ones that not the ones on the 20th floor, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
So, but I think now more than ever, we need to continue the work and pointing out what the hell the deal is and what the heck the deal, who is causing what. I mean, I think we're all hopeful what happened, we're hopeful what might happen in Georgia and Florida, but you know what? We need to point out to people, hey, because it means more coming from guys like us, that have to actually work for a living.
No, this is where, when we were on our tour, these were the issues that resonated with people. This is where I keep telling my Democratic Party friends, this is your message. Get back into your wheelhouse and run the campaign that Tim Ryan ran. Talk about those issues. That's what's important.
No, that's absolutely right. And if anything, because, hey, whatever the leadership's going to do, this is going to be up to us. And, if that's how they want to run elections down there in Georgia and in Florida, that's how they want to win, you know what? That ain't right. Because that's awful rich. And I mean, if anything, to point out that, if only we could cut off that funding. But you know what? Let's point that out, though. You know that state drains more money or takes in more money than they actually put out than the state that they actually make fun of, like in California, who's actually distributing out money. Is that fair? But to lead to a bigger thing of they don't care about you. All they want to do is get you ginned up and pissed off, because then how much of that ginned up and pissed off equals dollars in your bank account? How much does that ginned up and pissed off get you an extra day off of work? It doesn't. Does it give you more vacation time? Does it give you more sick time? No, it doesn't. They don't care about you at all. In fact, they're the ones that are shipping your job overseas, right to work. They're making it worse. And you know what? The thing that makes me mad about the Republicans, they could be dunking on the Democrats, and they're not.
Yep.
That, to me, sucks.
No, I mean, the reality is they don't have any issues that they're running on that helps the working class. And I say it all the time. Republicans hate working people. Just look at their policies. It comes out this way all the time.
Oh, yeah. Obama, that's the funny thing is, he's not my total favorite, but he hit the nail on the head. In fact, I almost thought, from my head or from our thoughts to his ears, right?
Yep.
He started pointing it out. What's their policy? Oh, yeah, tax cuts for the rich and blame the poor. That's their thing for everything. And we need to keep hammering that.
Absolutely. Eric, I appreciate the call, man. Great stuff.
Absolutely. No, hey, take care. Keep up the good work.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. No, I mean, Eric's spot on. I could have taken the night off and let Eric do the show because that's the message right there. And in fact, look, it's just not me saying this. It's just not me making this stuff up. The polling is there. Tim Ryan and John Fetterman both outperformed Biden in rural counties across the board with this working class message. And it shows that if Democrats would get their heads out of their, and they could eat into some of the Republican margins in rural America, because progressive policies are really popular. Getting people health care, really popular. Making sure that the wages that workers earn are sufficient to support a family, really popular. Retirement security, really popular. Going after corporate America and holding them accountable and breaking up monopolies, popular. Progressives, not so much, because the mainstream corporate-controlled for-profit media has just demonized them and made them the other. So when you're talking about Democrats or progressives, everyone puts up their defenses. But when you start talking about policy, the policy that's going to make their lives better, going across rural America and talking about broadband, major winner. And the weird thing is, the Democrats barely talk about that. And I know it's not happening yet, but the money's been allocated. It's going to start happening, and it better start happening soon. And when it does, I want to see 15-foot high Joe Biden, I did this signs. I want to see them plastered everywhere. Because here's the thing, and I got this response from a bunch of people on the road saying, well, the Democratic Party, you talk about all this great stuff, but the Democratic Party, they don't do any of this stuff. They're paid not to. And you go, but no, their policies, it's been passed. Legislation's been passed. Problem is, Democrats don't have the megaphone that the right has. They haven't built the massive infrastructure. And I'm going to say it a bunch of times. When we were in Iowa with J.D. Scholten, who, good on him, won his state House race, he said, look, talk radio radicalized the state of Iowa, which used to be a solid working class Democratic union state. Right-wing radio radicalized those folks. This is where we got to build the infrastructure. You got to have the conversations. You got to talk to people, and you got to back it up with policy. Words and deeds. Words and deeds. That simple. Thanks for the call, Eric. Appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Have the talk.
The clock is ticking. It's a big week for the planet as UN Climate Conference kicks off in Egypt. Major glaciers to disappear by 2050. Plus,
this is a massive system.
Late season storm Nicole takes aim at Florida's East Coast.
Nicole, all of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And the biggest threat to democracy is to have someone like Senator Warnock to vote against our Keystone Pipeline.
Okay, A, pipeline from Canada is not a threat to democracy, Herschel Walker. And 2, Senator Warnock did not vote against the pipeline. It was not up for a vote. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, as we go to air, a big day, Election Day, and I'm sure it has nothing at all to do with the climate, correct?
It has everything to do with the climate. But first, as we go to air, the east coast of Florida is under a new state of emergency as a rare November storm, Nicole, heads its way. It's forecast to deluge the state when it makes landfall as a hurricane later this week, even as residents are still trying to recover from deadly Hurricane Ian in September.
Cool.
It is a big week for the planet. Americans are voting in the critical 2022 midterm elections, an inflection point for the nation and the planet that will decide whether the U.S. acts with speed and scope to curb the climate crisis and remain competitive in the global clean energy revolution or doesn't.
Okay, but no matter what happens in the midterms, that $400 billion that the Democrats voted to go towards mitigating climate change, that stays, right?
Right, unless Republicans find some way to dismantle it. Simultaneously, the latest United Nations climate treaty negotiations, known as COP27, are underway in Egypt to hammer out implementation of the landmark Paris Agreement to keep global temperatures from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and transition all economies away from the fossil fuels that are causing the climate crisis. 2 reports released on the opening day of the conference underscore the challenge. The first, from the UN's World Meteorological Organization, finds the past 8 years were the 8 hottest years ever recorded since record-keeping began in the mid-1800s. That means that every year since 2016 has been one of the warmest on record, indicating that the world is now deep into the climate crisis.
Somebody ought to get together and have a conference about that.
The Stark Assessment sets out how record-high levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are supercharging extreme weather disasters from Pakistan to China and the U.S. The oceans are hotter than ever. The rate of sea level rise has doubled since 1993 due to the melting of land ice from Greenland, Antarctica, and land glaciers. A different report by UNESCO concludes that because of man-made global warming, major glaciers around the world will be gone by 2050, like UN World Heritage Sites Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania and Yosemite and Yellowstone National Parks in the United States.
Wow.
But if global temperature rise is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the study finds it is possible that only 1/3 of those glaciers will disappear by 2050.
So in that event, we'd still be able to see some glaciers at Yellowstone in 2050.
Maybe.
Of course, I'll be 1,000 years old.
It matters because glacier melt is a primary source of drinking water in some of the most volatile regions in the world. Against the backdrop of costly, record-shattering heat waves, droughts, and floods over the past few months, the COP27 UN Climate Conference kicked off with climate finance taking center stage. For the first time, the agenda includes formal negotiations on how rich nations should compensate poorer nations for the unavoidable impacts of climate change, known as loss and damage.
They have been fighting about this, it seems, for years at these COP conferences.
They have been. This is the first formal negotiations to hammer it out. Developing nations have contributed only a tiny fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing the climate crisis, but are hit first and worst by its cascading consequences, with repetitive disasters sapping their capacity to adapt to future disasters. Rich nations for years have failed to fulfill their promises to provide $100 billion a year to a fund to help developing countries cut their CO2 emissions and adapt to climate impacts. On Monday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres cited the mounting toll of weather disasters in urging countries to move quickly to implementation.
We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
Well, hopefully it's a battery electric vehicle. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we were talking earlier with Don Villar, the Secretary-Treasurer of the Chicago Federation of Labor, about their huge victory in Illinois. Look, this workers' right amendment, this is a big deal. To steal a Joe Biden line, this is a big blanking deal. And I'm hoping, something we've been talking about here on the program for a while, hoping this spreads. As we've been seeing workers organizing and the massive hurdles that they have to go through. I was reading something the other day that said 1 in 5 right now, 1 in 5 employers are firing someone illegally during a union drive. And I'm going, to be honest, I'm surprised it's not 5 out of 5, given how weak our labor laws are and what pathetic penalties there are. So it's almost like malpractice not to fire someone, which again, why we absolutely need major comprehensive labor law reform. Especially as we're seeing, workers at Starbucks and Apple and REI and other places attempting to organize. And here to share some thoughts on, maybe how we get to that place where workers have rights and they have the ability to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions. I've asked Nat Baldino to come talk with us. Nat is a policy analyst on education, labor, and worker justice policy over at the Center for Law and Social Policy. You can check out their website, clasp.org. We'll get links out on social media. Nat, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Rick.
So, a huge win in Illinois. I mean, you've got to look at that and go, really great hope in this moment, no?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But still a lot of work to be done, especially in the service sector.
No, I mean, at the end of it, this is a huge, just getting this in the law and on someone's constitution, making this a constitutional right is a huge thing. Now we just have to enforce, laws. And I look at how hard it's been for Starbucks workers. And this is something that you've been intimate with. Obviously, the Memphis 7, the 7 Starbucks workers fired in Memphis recently, you were intimate with that. This shouldn't be allowed to happen in this country. There should be massive penalties, but the reality is, as you know better than anyone, they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what the Memphis 7 went through, they, many would say that they got it in terms of how quickly the turnaround for their reinstatement was of only, between 6 and 9 months. Normally you can wait years to even get reinstated after you're fired. So consider themselves lucky, but, that really isn't the point that, okay, something bad happened and then immediately after they quickly got some sort of solution. The problem is that they never should have been fired in the first place. Right. And the fact that it's just sort of the cost of doing business and that organizing workers, can be asked, oh, well, isn't it illegal for them to fire us? And I can say, well, it's illegal, but that doesn't really matter anymore. Is just unconscionable to me.
No, but here's the thing. Let's step back for a second for folks who don't know. I can't imagine my listeners don't know that, there were 7 workers at Starbucks in Memphis who were fired for union organizing, and now they've been reinstated. Are they actually back to work though?
I don't think they're back yet. There's, appeals and.
See, here's the problem. This again is how broken our system is. And the penalties are pathetic because, as the penalties are, your lost wages minus whatever you were earning. There are no pain and suffering money. There's no penalty phase for, hey, you were wrong. You did this illegally. You should suffer consequences. There's just, hey, whatever you would have earned minus whatever you did earn. So if you got a job making maybe the same money or a little bit more, there's no penalty for these companies to fire you.
Right, exactly. Take into account how emotionally and financially laborious it is to even consider going through a trial and all of that. So it's really, it's really hard to get workers to even be willing to sort of take out kind of arguing for their reinstatement when they see just what they're up against and how quickly their employer is willing to break any law just in order to maintain their profits.
So the reason I bring this up is not to scare people off from organizing, because I think in this moment we need people joining and forming unions at historic numbers. I think this is that moment that people need to be doing this and grabbing onto these rights. But it also is a voting issue for me. It's one of these things where you go, look, these are the kind of policies we need to be pushing for to make it easier for workers to demand their rights and not to be punished for it. So when people hear that, they can be fired, and really, honestly, if you're corporate America, you're firing people just because you can. I'm hoping this is getting people angry and ready to say we need change.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, I don't think it can be really understated or ignored that even though we have labor laws in place right now, they're pretty much merely symbolic. And so we're talking about, pro and funding the NLRB and things like that. But when it comes down to it and you look at these things, our labor law structure is very reactive and it's not proactive. And it can't just be on the workers to be proactive, right? We need a government that supports workers for using their right that the government gave us to be able to organize. That's not something that they can just, treat as an afterthought for them to fix when something goes wrong. They should be proactively increasing the likelihood that we can actually use the rights that we have.
Now, this is one of the things that I'm grateful for President Biden, that he's been saying, look, it's our government's responsibility to encourage people to join unions and to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions. That's new in my lifetime. There hasn't been a president who said, yeah, this is what the intent of the law is. Even though as a labor guy, I know this, we've never had a president come out and say that. So I'm going, this is a step in the right direction. Let's build on this. But you as an organizer and you as someone who's gone through this, is that filtering down to people on the ground? Are they hearing that? Are they internalizing it? Or is the fear still there that, hey, look, the boss has told me, look, if I join a union, they're going to fire all of us?
No, I think it's absolutely starting to be heard on the ground. And I think that, with the labor market, how it is, and people sort of having seen the worst and the best in some ways of humanity in the pandemic, I think people are willing to put things at stake for a purpose, and I think that that Starbucks organizing and all the rest of the coffee shops that have been organizing in the past few years is really, it's not a fad. It's only the beginning. It's not going away. And I think people are kind of recognizing, oh, this could be me as well, and really see themselves in the Starbucks workers.
No, absolutely. For me, the National Labor Relations Act was passed in 1935, gutted, basically in 1947 with Taft-Hartley. And every change since has been making it more difficult, putting more barriers and more obstacles in the middle of the road for workers to demand their rights, to be able to collectively bargain for better wage, hours, and conditions. So you as the expert, you as a guy who's done this, what should we be pushing for to make it easier? I go back to my grandparents' generation. They signed cards. They got 50% plus one. You started bargaining. There were no secret elections. There were no months of harassment and intimidation. And if you didn't bargain in good faith, people went on strike, and they had secondary boycotts, and they shut things down. The NLRA was a peace treaty. It was a peace treaty between labor and management. So because my grandparents' generation were tearing this country apart, demanding better wages, hours, conditions. But you as the expert here, what should we be doing with what we've got? What would make it better? Is it the EFCA from years ago? Is it the PRO Act? Is it something more? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think the PRO Act's absolutely a start. I think that 100% funding the NLRB and starting to really focus on strategic enforcement is a really big thing. Starting to think of, okay, let's focus on the high violation, low reporting industries and really start to get there before something happens is a big thing. But I also think in a bigger sense that what's happening now is sort of showing the limits of the law and is bigger than a law in a certain way. I think that we should be promoting more striking before union recognition. I think that things like sectoral councils are becoming very appealing to people. I think that really making sure that the policies come from the workers and that it's based in worker power and that the government is providing a resource to protect those workers rather than the other way around, I think.
No, this is where my mind was going to go, Nat, because the reality is, I think back to my grandparents' generation. They were literally tearing the country apart brick by brick, demanding that they be paid fairly for the work that they do. Yeah. I don't know that we're that country.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know we're that working class.
Yeah, and we have different means of the way that we go about things now. But, at the same time, the coffee shop fad of labor organizing, you think of a coffee shop as this quaint, sort of hippie place, this third space that we made it out to seem. And, really on the ground, the business model of a cafe is resembling more and more the factory floor, really. And so I think that this actually is a really good opportunity and industry for us to bring sort of blue-collar trade mentalities into what we consider the young person progressive organizing space. Because when you get down to it, I was talking with 45-second window time. So in the drive-through, they have 45 seconds from when someone places their order to when they have to hand them their drink.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound that different from Amazon. That doesn't sound that different from Toyota's lean production model. All of these things, profit making, trying to make workers do more with less, trying to squeeze every last bit of profit we can. That isn't something that has changed since, Ford invented the Ford system.
Yeah, the assembly.
That's something that is creeping into the service sector.
No, you're absolutely right. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Nat Baldino. Nat's a policy analyst on education, labor, and worker justice policy at the Center for Law and Social Policy. Their website, clasp.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at the work that they do there. Now, this idea that, and I'm glad you made the connection, that these coffee shops are kind of like the factory floor because we've lost those factory jobs. And people are like, we need the manufacturing. And I'm one of those people too, said I want those manufacturing jobs back. But I don't think people really want those dirty, dangerous factory jobs back. They want those union jobs. They want those wages, those benefits, that job security. They want the dignity that came with having one of those jobs. And, when those factory jobs went away, we were told that these new service jobs, the baristas, the service workers who are cleaning hotels and those were going to be the jobs of the future. They didn't tell us, though, they were going to be at poverty wages in desperate conditions. So for me, it seems natural that would be where, and I would hope that it would have happened earlier, but this is where the organizing would happen because these are the jobs of the future. These are the jobs we have. Let's make them good jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that a lot of people often talk about the service sector as sort of not really being a strategic sector to organize, but, I really think that coffee employs hundreds of thousands of people and is still a part of the service sector, and a low job quality floor set for baristas means justification for a low floor for everyone else. And I would also say that, a lot of people have misconceptions about what a coffee shop actually looks like these days. It's not just a little island. They're often, especially with third and fourth wave coffee shops right now, really tied to wholesale and make a lot of profit out of that, have extensive relationships with farmers, suppliers, production, distribution. I think that there's a really
Yeah, I think we lost you.
Targeting distribution, places like Great Lakes Coffee in Michigan. They just recently did that. They targeted wholesale, got the Detroit Art Institute to stop providing Great Lakes Coffee and are trying to do it with other places. The coffee shop I used to work at provides the beans for the White House. Think of how big that would be if we targeted that kind of wholesale. I think that there's a lot of ways that coffee can interact with logistics, warehousing, distribution, really everything, because, you know, these kind of businesses, they have a brand, and they have just all of these different networks of ways that they try and move their brand.
No, and the weird thing is, and this is where, I've been saying every job should be a union job. You want a good job, it should be a union job. But these are what we have, and this is what we should be making the living wage jobs out of. And I know we're told, no, these are transitional. They should. I don't care what you do for a living. You should be paid a decent wage. You should. Every job has dignity. Every job should have respect attached to it. And this is where this fight for me is. So I guess last line of questioning I've got for you, because in this moment, as you've said, there's a long line of other industries that can be tied into this. I keep coming back to, it's a societal thing. We need to be reaching out to our fellow workers. I'm encouraged that the younger generation gets it, but I'm hoping the fire catches, and that people start understanding that this is the way forward. This is how we reunite the country, I believe, and make it a more prosperous place.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and I think that as more and more people, start entering the service sector for, a part-time job, or they're in the middle of gig work and they take on waitressing or things like that, a lot of people come through the service sector and they often think of it as they're like in between, like, oh, I'm just going to work at a cafe until I finish my degree or something like that. It really isn't becoming that. It ends up being somewhere that you stay, and I want to make it somewhere that you stay, because being a barista is an awesome job. It's a lot of fun, and it sucks when you get paid so little and you're struggling so much for something that should be a good job. It's not inherent to being a barista that your job is bad, right? It's not inherent to any job that it's bad.
It does my organizer heart good to hear you say, we're going to make this better. Even if I'm not going to stay, I'm going to leave something better behind. Does my organizer heart good. Nat, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. Hope you'll come back and share some more thoughts. I'm sure this will pop up again soon. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Good stuff, Nat Baldino. Make sure you check out their website, clasp.org, where he's the policy analyst for education, labor, and worker justice policy at the Center for Law and Social Policy. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. Generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I'll tell you, that it does my organizer heart good to hear someone say, you know what, I may not do this forever, may not do this for 6 months, but I want to leave something better behind. I want to make this job good for the next guy, so they don't have to. They don't have to suffer the indignity or the poverty wages. That's where we need to get. And again, I come back to my grandparents' generation. The fact that they weren't willing to take it at all. My grandparents' generation, they were intolerant of the status quo. I'm just happy to have a job was not in their vocabulary. This is where we need to get back to. And again, coming out of this election, where I think, someone like Tim Ryan, who was on the right message, someone like John Fetterman on the right message. And in fact, it is resonating. It is moving voters in rural areas, and Democrats need to do more of it. But it's where the messaging needs to be. Because as I say all the time, my true north, making workers' lives better. And we do that. We know how to do that. We do that by giving people the ability to have a say in their workplace, to share in the wealth that their labor creates. Someone asked me not too long ago, what'd you learn on the Working Class Heroes radio tour? As you were out in these rural places, these used to be places, talking to people in bars and restaurants and, the events that we had, what'd you learn? And I learned, and I don't know that I learned it as much as it reinforced my belief that, workers are angry, and rightly so. Angry that they were promised that if they worked hard and played by the rules, they'd get ahead. And they're not ahead. They were basically promised that, their children would do better than they did. If they did well in school and they did all the things they were supposed to do, that it was their birthright. That's been broken. And it's been broken by a billionaire class who's been self-serving and greedy. And you look at the inflation that we're suffering under. A massive part of this is corporate America going, hey, this is a great opportunity to line our pockets. And you need not look any further than their earnings calls. They're saying it. They're saying it out loud. They're not ashamed of it anymore. And this is where we as voters, because look, they know we're divided. They know the anger is real. They know that they've forced outrage candy down our throats for so long that we look at each other with hatred and disdain. They know that. That's mission accomplished. They got what they wanted. The Jay Gould, I can easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. There it is. And they don't even have to pay for it now. We're doing it to ourselves. And this is where I keep coming back to. We got to take off the red hats and the blue hats and put on the hard hats. We got to talk about rebuilding this country and moving all of us forward. And if you need to be angry with somebody, be angry with the policymakers who continually give massive tax cuts to the wealthy in corporate America, telling us that, it'll trickle down. They're the job creators, after all. Give them all the money. They know what to do with it. They'll create jobs, only to find out that they want to lay a bunch of people off because they claim that's how you're going to bring down inflation. By cutting your wages and costing you your job, that's going to help them. Think about that for a second. Let the Republican messaging machine sink in for a moment. That's what they're telling us. That's what the Fed's saying. We need to raise raise unemployment so that we can crush any ability to get better wages, and we need unemployment to go up so that the job market is not as tight and wages will go down. But here's the weird thing. And again, I keep coming back to this one inconvenient truth. Corporate America has never been more profitable. They're lining their pockets and have been. This is where the problem is. And this is where, again, we as the voting populace, while we still have outnumbered them, we've out-procreated them, there are more of us. If we get our heads out of our behinds and we start focusing on the really important stuff, that kitchen table economic stuff, how are we going to feed the kids, keep a roof over their head, give them the opportunity of a future, instead of all the divisive stuff meant to rip us apart. If we can't undo that and start focusing on the right thing, we're going to continue to be ripped apart and ripped off. That's the sad reality. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, the professor is going to be here. My executive producer, Brett Pransky. My tour mate for the month of the Working Class Heroes Tour. Going to share some thoughts on Tuesday's results. Back after this. Stick around. Remember, if you missed any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1952. That was the day that the labor movement lost Philip Murray. Philip was born in Scotland in 1886 to an Irish Catholic family. His father was a coal miner and a union leader. Philip followed his father into the mines. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1952. That was the day that the labor movement lost Philip Murray. Philip was born in Scotland in 1886 to an Irish Catholic family. His father was a coal miner and a union leader. Philip followed his father into the mines at just the age of 10 years old. The father and son made the trip to the Pennsylvania coal fields together when Philip was just 16. They saved enough money and then sent for the rest of their family. One day, Philip got into an altercation with one of his bosses. Not only was he fired, his entire family was kicked out of their company home. From that point on, Philip was dedicated to the union cause as the only hope for working people. He quickly rose through the ranks of the United Mine Workers, becoming vice president by the time he was 33. He worked closely with United Mine Workers president John L. Lewis. During the 1930s, there became a nationwide drive to organize industrial workers. Philip was appointed to lead the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, a key sector for the industrial effort. The Steelworker Campaign met with historic success. They reached a collective bargaining agreement with U.S. Steel, the giant of the industry. Philip went on to become the first president of the United Steelworkers of America, as well as president of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Under his leadership, industrial labor became a powerful force. But that force was checked by the passage of the Anti-Union Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. The anti-communist hysteria of the Red Scare also took its toll on the CIO, forcing Philip to expel some of the most radical unions from the organization. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Every election day, we're told, go vote. Your vote is sacred, they tell us. It's your constitutional right. Well, yes to voting, but most people, including most politicians, would be astonished to learn that America's Constitution contains no declaration that we the people have a right to vote. In the founding document of our democratic republic, voting is mentioned 37 times, but none of them embrace access to the ballot as a fundamental right. This is no oversight, for most of the founders of the 1780s were unabashed plutocrats who wanted suffrage restricted to white male property owners, fencing out the Democratic rabble. James Madison himself, author of the Bill of Rights, insisted that only the wealthy be allowed to vote, calling them, quote, the safest repositories of Republican liberty. He warned that poorer classes could be swayed by populist anger at the propertied elites. Among the prominent founders, only Benjamin Franklin had the temerity to dissent from Madison's institutionalization of plutocratic rule, pointing out that the vast majority of those who had fought, bled, and died to establish the new nation were landless commoners. He also rudely noted that the wealthy were at least as corruptible as the poorest of the poor, so disenfranchising the masses would do nothing to improve a government's virtue. Slowly, painfully, generations of grassroots commoners have inched open the American ballot box to more of us, extending the legal possibilities of democratic participation. But as we see in this year's blatant, violent mob efforts by the right-wing minority to shut out millions of legitimate voters, the few can still overrule the many in America. This is Jim Hightower saying, meanwhile, bills calling for a constitutional amendment to affirm every citizen's fundamental right to cast a ballot have never been given a hearing, much less a vote.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So while we were in Cincinnati, we got to sit down with Cincinnati City Councilman Greg Landsman, who is now Congressman-elect Landsman, who has defeated incumbent Steve Chabot. And good. The best thing I could say is good. Bye. Need more of that. And look, yesterday, I'll tell you, I went in with a little reservation. Wasn't sure when we talked about this, wasn't sure what to expect. Was it going to be the red wave? Was it going to be the red ripple? Was it going to be a blue wave? And look, kind of a blue wave. Given a midterm, wow. Here to share some thoughts, especially looking back over the month we spent on the road on the Working Class Heroes Tour and kind of our expectations. I've asked the professor, my executive producer here at the program, Brett Pransky, to share some thoughts on yesterday's results. Brett, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, always good to be here.
So let's start with expectations yesterday. Where were you yesterday? What came out of it?
Well, in judging my expectations to this point, I've been pretty consistently saying, especially on our travels, that I thought we were probably about 2 to 3 points better than the polls. Now, given the wide range of the polls, that's, you don't know exactly what that means, but I thought we would do a little bit better than everyone thought we would. Turns out we did a lot better than most people thought we would. But maybe I saw a hint of it, but I didn't expect what actually happened.
No, I look at this and look, exactly what we were talking about the entire time. Would young people come out and would women come out heavily? And they did. This election can be summed up really simply that young people and women came out in big numbers.
Yeah, and that's kind of something that we saw on the road too. You notice that a lot of the candidates we spoke to were very young, very energized. The women both in the races and the people we just talked to in all the different places that we went were very fired up, about the abortion issue, about rights being taken away and so on. So, I, again, had a sense that the things weren't going to go exactly how the right-wing media, was telling us they were going to go. But again, didn't expect the result to be quite as large as it was.
Now let's talk the tale of two states, because I look at my state of Pennsylvania, which went pretty much where I think a lot of people thought it would. I predicted it would take a couple of days to count the mail-in ballots to get to where we are, but I said Shapiro was going to win, and I thought Fetterman was going to win, and they did on election night. But I look at Ohio, and man, your state, my former state, I really thought Tim Ryan was going to do better because I thought he had the right message.
Yeah, he really did. And he worked hard, too. I mean, he was crisscrossing the state. He was talking to everybody that he could. Really did a good job of putting working class issues first and foremost with everyone. But at the end of the day, I mean, he just wasn't able to get over the top.
So now is Ohio now officially a red state? I know while we were going through Ohio, everyone was saying, no, it's a rigged state. And it is. It's one of the most rigged states in the country, thanks to your criminal legislature. Right. But look, Ryan ran what I thought was a great campaign, was on the right messaging, and wow.
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, because there's really no doubting the results statewide. I mean, usually if a race is gerrymandered, the statewide count and the local counts don't match. You know what I mean? You see that those numbers and that the line drawing and things really take effect, as to take what would be a majority and turn it into a minority, and take a minority and turn it into a majority. But that didn't really happen here. Now, granted, the massive supermajority that the Republicans won in the state Senate and the state legislature are way beyond the voting numbers, as what gerrymandering will do. But those statewide numbers are still pretty solid at the end of the day. And again, it came down to what I like to call the 3-county fiefdom in Ohio: the Hamilton County, Franklin County, and Cuyahoga County, which is Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland respectively. Those counties didn't vote. They voted at a clip that was about 10 to 12% lower turnout than the rest of the state. And that's what decided it. Now, it wasn't gonna help in some elections, like Nan Whaley's race. She was beaten pretty soundly, and I don't think any turnout numbers, in those 3 major cities were going to change that. But the Ryan race was gettable. Yeah, that was something that we could have won if that turnout had come along and they had been able to fire up those voters, get them to the polls, even at the same rate as the smaller, more red counties. Tim Ryan being next senator.
I had someone, throw out to me the gerrymandering issue again as something that has, basically disenfranchised a lot of voters in those communities that you mentioned, because there's, your votes, it doesn't matter. You're in districts that it doesn't matter if you vote or not. The outcome's, pretty much certain before the first ballot is cast. Does that play into your thinking at all, or is that just an excuse?
No, I think it really does play into to what happened, because when you think about it, when you pack all the Democratic votes into very small urban areas, and then in the representatives in those areas, say the reps for Congress, take Joyce Beatty's district in Franklin County, she won by 40 points. Everyone knows she's going to win by 40 points. So the outcome in your backyard is already known. So if it's already known, you got one more reason to stay on the couch. You have to be motivated to come out and vote for those statewide, folks. And so gerrymandering has, a number of effects that take place over time. When you know the outcome is certain before you ever go to the polls, even if you can have an effect in another area by voting in your own area, it just tends to take all the air out of the race, ahead of time. And again, when everything's a foregone conclusion, when you already know how the outcome is going to be, you stay home.
Yeah. Because I'm trying to figure out why, those three counties, which are the big Democratic counties, why in this election they stayed home. And because this was that driver. It's democracy, it's women's rights, it's workers' rights. I mean, you had a guy on the ballot who should have been able to excite working people to go out and say, finally, we got a champion who's going to be in the Senate, who's going to fight for our values. I thought that would have been something that would have energized.
And and I thought the same. But at the end of the day, the turnout numbers are the turnout numbers. Now, again, when something like this happens, and again, this isn't the first time this has happened. This happened in 2018 during the blue wave election, where every race in America, went half a dozen points left. Ohio went a half dozen points right. And I remember in 2018, the last time Sherrod Brown was up for election, he went into election night up 16 points over Jim Renacci, which, by the way, whatever happened to that guy? He's up 16 points on election night. By the time the polls close, he wins by 6. So, everything swung dramatically to the right in 2018. And I remember that fondly because I was part of that. I was a candidate at that time. So I got to enjoy that statewide drubbing along with a lot of colleagues. And now it's just happened again. Another midterm cycle and another case in which Ohio defies the nationwide trend by moving even further to the right in a way that nobody expected.
Yeah. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Brett Pradsky. The professor, our executive producer, he also writes over at Courier Newsroom and the Keystone. We'll get links out on the social media how you can take a look at that. Now, Ron Klain, the chief of staff for President Biden, said today, never underestimate how much Team Biden is underestimated. This was supposed to be, if you listen to the right-wing media, if you listen to the blathering heads, this was supposed to be a drumming. This is Biden inflation. This is, everything's going to hell in a handbag. It's all Joe Biden's fault. And yet, he didn't get the drumming he was supposed to get.
That's right. And, and I think it's kind of simple to figure out how it happened. One, most of the narrative about the red wave or whatever you want to call it, I'm sure they focus group tested several different names, but people spent a lot of money. A lot of really rich people spent a whole lot of money to make it appear as if their ideology is a lot more popular than it actually is. And we're seeing this in a number of different places in a number of different states. And actually, we saw it in the run up to this election. I keep referring back to the Kansas referendum on abortion, where on that night everyone thought it was a toss up, and then the measure passed by 20 points. Again, the right wing, feeding the machine, flooding the zone, making it appear like their ideology is much more popular than it actually is. And then when you actually put it in front of the people think differently. And this happened again last night. There were these kind of abortion referendums, in 5 states, and in all of them, including I think one was Kentucky, the pro-choice side of the argument, held sway. So, I think what we're seeing here, and again, what we're seeing not just in right-wing media, but also in the more left-leaning media, because they pick up this stuff and run with it when they see it. Is this, kind of narrative-driven rather than fact-driven view on what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's interesting how the narrative didn't play. The red wave turned into kind of a trickle.
It really did. It really did. It was good to see. They had it coming.
Look, I mean, the reality is we've staved off the end of democracy for another election cycle. So how do you think this is going to play out? Because it looks like the Republicans are going to take the House, and we're going to end up with, I don't know who crazy for Speaker is going to be just yet. Looks like Kevin McCarthy maybe, although Matt Gaetz is supposedly rallying an opposition, because maybe we're going to have Marjorie Trainwreck Green, which would be fun. I mean, sitting in this chair, seeing crazy take over one of the houses, kind of interesting and entertaining on a certain level. I mean, if you're not going to get anything done and if it's going to be chaotic, it might as well at least be mildly entertaining, or no?
Well, it will definitely be entertaining. I wouldn't say it would be entertaining. We're going to watch, but we're going to watch the same way we would watch a train wreck. You kind of can't not watch. You drive by one, your head's going to turn. You're going to watch it happen. There's nothing else you can do. You have to look at the train wreck happening. But that said, nothing is really going to get done because the Republicans will obstruct everything. So don't expect any new legislation or anything like that. But, to be honest, that's going to be a big problem for them in 2024 because, we talk a lot about the legislative successes in the last 2 years. Joe Biden got a lot of things done. All right. He passed a lot of bills, did a lot of things that are going to help a lot of Americans. But one thing we haven't seen is the results of that legislation yet. A lot of the money hasn't been spent. A lot of those projects haven't started. A lot of those jobs haven't actually been created yet. All of that stuff is coming. So even if the Republicans manage to sit on their thumbs for 2 years and do nothing but obstruct and do nothing but, hold sham impeachment hearings and do all those things, what's going to happen in the background is these policies are going to start to take effect. They're going to start to change lives. They're going to start to make a difference. And the American people are going to see it. And in 2024, if these programs are bearing fruit and the Republicans just spent 2 years getting absolutely nothing done, then you're going to see a different kind of wave in 2024, and it's not going to be pretty.
Is this an opportunity for the Republicans to save themselves at this moment, to maybe purge themselves of the MAGA wing, or do you think they're the Trumpites are burrowed too far in? Because I was thinking about this today. I mean, Republicans are going to have a slim majority. The inclination that I think they're going to have is to do all of the crazy stuff, impeachments every other week and hearings on Hunter Biden's laptop and on, video games or whatever. They're going to want to do don't you think there are going to be some, maybe, and I know this is a dumb question, but don't you think there maybe a couple Republicans are going to go, no, we actually have to get something done. We actually have to, move. Nah, never mind. What am I talking about?
I think you kind of pre-answered the question for me, because when you think about it, if they were going to get anything done, you would have seen their goals during this election cycle. You notice the Republicans didn't run on any kind of platform whatsoever. They didn't propose any kind of legislation. They didn't say they were going to do anything at all. All they did, and all they have done for the past several cycles, is give you someone to hate. That person is usually Nancy Pelosi. So what happens is, as soon as you decide to run as a Democrat, they put your picture next to Nancy Pelosi's picture, and try to drive more violence to her front door. And they just kept doing this. All they give you in every cycle is someone to hate and someone to blame for whatever it is that they don't like that's going on. But you notice they didn't propose any policy. So it's not like they're going to, if they do anything, they're going to try to gut Social Security and Medicare or just end them outright. And so, when you think about the idea that, is this the time where they're going to purge themselves of Donald Trump? No, that's never going to happen. It's Donald Trump's party. It's Donald Trump's stage, and he's not going to get off that stage until he chooses to. And nobody's going to push him, because he will win any primary he decides to step into. And as long as that's the case, the Republican Party is stuck with him. And as far as I'm concerned, you can go ahead and go down with that ship.
Yeah, so I guess last question I've got for you, because where does this lead Trump? There was talk that the day before the election he was going to announce, and I guess he was talked down off that perch. I guess 14th, 15th down the road, that it's potentially going to announce that he's going to run for president. which I don't get why he would, other than maybe stave off an indictment. But what does this election mean to him? Because he kind of took it on the chin. In fact, took it so much on the chin here in Pennsylvania, blaming the wife. It's her fault. She made me do it.
Yeah, Donald Trump didn't have a good night last night. But then again, you're never going to hear him say that. He's going to claim victory in all the cases where Republicans won, and he's going to deny that he had anything to do with any of the races that they lost. This is just who the man is. You know what I mean? But he controls the entire thing. He controls the Republican Party. They dance to whatever, to whatever drumbeat he decides to play. And it's going to be like that until the party dissolves, I would guess.
Do you see that happening? Do you see the Republican Party imploding? Or do you see them forging on and moving more to the extreme right? Although here in Pennsylvania, again, very heartened to find my Republican friends overwhelmingly rejecting Doug Mastriano, who did something that no one else has done in this state. Started off on the right wing and then went further right during the general election, only to get a good sound drumming.
Yeah, I mean, he did, but I think that we need a little word of caution on this as well, because with Doug Mastriano, you have, and this is not hyperbole, you have a full-on fascist running for governor in the state. And he was able to get, 42% of the vote? 42% of the electorate in Pennsylvania is okay with a fascist, with a guy who, 20 years ago would have gotten 10% of the vote, maybe 7. You know what I mean? I think that while it's good that he was beaten, and he was beaten convincingly, all right, the fact that he was able to drum up that level of support, that hints at a much bigger problem that we're all going to have to deal with in one way or another.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you, but at least today, democracy somewhat saved for now. And we'll see what happens in Georgia. As where I started the night thinking that we were going to have a Senator Herschel Walker. Maybe we'll see what happens in the run out. Maybe there's hope. Maybe there's hope. But Brett, appreciate the time, man. As always, great stuff.
No, thanks for having me.
Our good friend, the producer, the professor, Brett Pransky. You can also check out his work over at Courier Newsroom. We'll get links out on social media how you can check that out. Can take a quick break. Right back after this. Remember, if you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you will find ours. And if it isn't there, tell us. We'll get it there. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. The Committee for Industrial Organizations was created by 8 unions as part of the American Federation of Labor. United Mine Workers President John L. Lewis was the driving force behind this new committee. His aim was to organize mass production industrial workers as opposed to focusing on those in the skilled trades. While the American Federation of Labor had included some industrial unions, the craft unionists were the dominant force in the organization. The Great Depression had hit industrial workers and their unions hard. Leaders from the heavily affected unions pressed for more support from the AFL. In response, the AFL did authorize organizing drives in the automobile, rubber, and steel industries, but they gave little financial support or effective leadership to those unions. Matters came to a head at the AFL's 1935 convention when mine workers president John L. Lewis punched the president of the Carpenters Union. Afterwards, Lewis called together various industrial union leaders, including Sidney Hillman, head of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, and Harvey Fremming of the Oil Workers Union, to discuss the creation of the CIO. In its statement of purpose, the CIO declared its aim to encourage the AFL to organize by industry. However, the AFL's leadership was not sympathetic to what they saw as an internal rivalry. In 1936, the AFL suspended all of the CIO unions. This led to the industrial union's breakaway from the AFL to form a rival federation. The CIO changed its name to the Congress of Industrial Organizations. By 1938, the CIO had amassed 3 million members. The CIO ran successful organizing drives in auto, mining, meatpacking, and steel. The two union organizations finally remerged in 1955. forming what is known today as the AFL-CIO. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So, look, I find it interesting that, here in this state, and I don't think Brett's wrong. 20 years ago, I don't think Mastriano gets 10% of the vote. So there are some problems. And look, I think we're just in this hyper-polarized kind of moment where you got people who are just pulling levers. That we've so demonized the other side. And I've never had the visceral reaction to a candidate that I had to Mastriano. Because of, I didn't like Dr. Oz, not a fan, wouldn't have voted for him, but there wasn't a visceral fear, a visceral concern that this could be the end of democracy as we know it. Mastriano, a much different kind of feel there. In fact, there were a couple of, and I cannot verify that it's accurate and true, but, there were a couple of people tweeting out that they had served under Mastriano in different places, and I guess they used to call him Captain Jesus because he was such a theocrat, such a fascist. I mean, I hate using that word, but it is what it is. This kind of, the theocratic governance, this kind of, like I said, I've never had this kind of visceral reaction to a candidate to where you go, this is bad. And for me, going into Tuesday's election, it was, what kind of a state do I live in? What kind of neighbors do I have? When I see neighbors who have put the signs out in front of their house, is it that they're just the lever pullers, and here they put these signs out and haven't really thought about it, or are they really truly supporters of the direction that someone like him would have taken this state? This is, and I think Brett's right, this is something we have to deal with. And it comes back to, I think it comes back to conversations. Again, when we were on the road and we were explaining to people, this is the kind of stuff that the extreme wants to do, they were repelled by it. And fortunately, I think Josh Shapiro did a very good job of getting that message out and talking about where we move the state. And this is where, again, as I said earlier in the show, this is where I think Democrats need to really work on their chops a bit and take credit for the things that they do, take credit for the bills that they've passed and the lives that they've made better, and talk about it. The messaging has just not been great. And as Brett said, Biden and this administration, they've hit home runs. They've had big pieces of legislation that are going to make people's lives better, going to reinvest in this country and make us stronger in the future. There's a lot of good stuff here. But you got to talk about it. You got to sell it. And this is where, again, I love Joe Biden. He's not Barack Obama. He's not Bill Clinton. He's not a great orator. He never was. And that's not the reason that you voted for him. You voted for him because of the policies. You voted for him because he was going to reshore manufacturing and invest in infrastructure and help strengthen unions. He was going to do those things. And he's been promoting and pushing for those things. That's why you vote for the guy. And I come back to this moment where this was a huge election. And it was supposed to be a referendum on Biden inflation. It was supposed to be a referendum on Joe Biden, which everybody were told we were supposed to hate. I found it interesting. The guy over at the F channel, that Jesse Waters, said, people don't hate Joe Biden the way they did Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Yeah, ask that woman who I spoke to in Erie holding the big giant F Biden flag. Ask the guy down the street here who's flying the F Biden flag from the flagpole. I think you're trying to change the narrative. The reality is the vast majority of the country, I think they've finally woken up to being afraid of the extreme conservatism, afraid of the Mastrianos and what the F channel has been peddling. We'll see where this takes us from here. But I have a glimmer of hope. I have a glimmer of hope, and we got to pick it up and move forward. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, podcast. Grab the podcast. Wherever you get yours, you'll find ours. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show.